I was recently having coffee with a sustainability consultant in one of those very sleek glass-walled cafes in London. And he spent, the better part of an hour just waxing poetic about degrowth.
Yes.
Degrowth, exactly. And the moral imperative of carbon quotas. His face was just radiating this quiet confidence of someone who believes they've already won the future. You know the type. To him, progress was just a series of legislative wins and behavioral nudges.
A world of paperwork.
A world of paperwork. A world of using less, doing less, and, being less. But then, I brought up Hife. I mentioned that on this small patch of land known as Science Island, a group of engineers had just held a plasma at 120 million degrees Celsius for exactly 1,066 seconds.
And what was the reaction?
The shift was fascinating. That calm, visionary expression didn't just crack, it vanished. He didn't ask about the physics or the staggering engineering feat of this artificial sun. Instead, he just scoffed, dismissed it as unregulated state theater and environmentally opaque before quickly pivoting to this bitter rant about unfair industrial subsidies and reckless competition.
Interesting. So the mask slipped.
In that one moment, the mask of high-minded environmentalism just slipped away to reveal this raw defensive anxiety. It was as if he realized, just in a flash, that a world defined by the mastery of stars has absolutely no use for a world defined by the mastery of paperwork. And that pivot from the moral high ground to this frantic, almost desperate dismissal, it just left me stunned. It highlighted this staggering gap in reality. While one side of the globe is preoccupied with the semantics of scarcity and this idea of an Atlantic twilight, the other side is busy reconstructing the foundational power layer of human civilization.
And that's what we're really talking about today.
It made me realize that the 1,066-second run wasn't just some laboratory record. It was a physical verdict on which civilization is actually prepared to lead the 21st century, which is merely managing its own decline.
That moment you described, it really does encapsulate the tension we're diving into today. That 1,066-second verdict, sustaining a star-like plasma for nearly 18 minutes, it's so much more than a technical footnote.
It feels like a judgment.
It serves as a physical judgment on competing civilizational models. So the mission of this deep dive is to really understand the deep structural and cultural mechanisms that allowed this success to happen. We're going to be comparing strategic, long-term state planning, which can operate on a multi-decadal horizon.
Right, something that looks beyond the next election.
Exactly. We'll compare that with the inherent short-termism of, say, 4-year electoral cycles. And we'll contrast a culture that prioritizes massive physical output, what we're calling an engineering-first approach, with a societal model that's become increasingly dominated by financial abstraction and bureaucracy.
So we're really moving past a simple who's ahead in the technology race. We're looking at a contest of political systems, of economic priorities, and maybe even deep cultural values. The stakes are, well, they're immense. Whoever masters fusion first essentially controls the foundational energy source for the rest of the century.
Indeed. And it's not just about producing electricity, It's about controlling the physical foundation of future geopolitical and economic prosperity. The nation that manages to operationalize this technology will secure a strategic advantage that can prove absolutely decisive in the global competition for leadership.
Okay, so let's begin by unpacking that strategic component, because fusion has, it's always been the technology of tomorrow, always 30 years away.
The old joke, yeah, always 30 years away and always will be.
And that longevity requirement, it immediately brings into focus what kind of institutional structure you even need to support it. I remember reading the story about a veteran engineer in Hife, a man who had dedicated over 35 years of his life to the Institute of Plasma Physics.
Wow, his entire career.
His entire career. When he started, fusion was barely a promise. He worked through the transition from these older research devices to the current East reactor. And he recalled watching his Western counterparts struggle year after year with budget uncertainties.
The funding roller coaster.
Exactly. Forced to adjust their research based on the whims of a new funding cycle or a shift in political opinion. Meanwhile, he worked with what was described as the quiet confidence of a gardener, planting a tree he knew he might never sit under. That 1,066-second record, for him, it wasn't a lucky break.
It was inevitable.
It was the inevitable, almost mechanical result of a multi-decadal roadmap that simply never wavered. This is the essence of what you're calling a generational relay, isn't it?
It is the defining feature. Look, fusion is one of the most complex, most capital-intensive scientific challenges humanity has ever faced. It requires building facilities the size of football stadiums and perfecting the physics over, at a minimum, a path of 30 to 50 years.
30 to 50 years.
That timeline is just. It is fundamentally incompatible with the political time horizon of a typical 4-year election cycle. The Chinese model, in contrast, provides a level of state capacity and planning stability that, well, it transcends individual political administrations.
That structural advantage seems almost unfair when you think about the political noise in Western democracies. Committing to a 50-year science project is a heavy lift when a politician needs tangible results in 4 years to get reelected.
It creates a crucial strategic buffer. The state-led approach ensures the project is insulated from the constant budget fluctuations and the, quote, whims of popular sentiment that so often plague massive science efforts elsewhere.
So they're not worried about a new Congress coming in and slashing the budget in half.
Precisely. Fusion requires what I would call a saturated assault on physics. That means you need the best minds, you need stable funding, and you need institutional continuity for a sustained, focused effort. This commitment isn't seen as a luxury item on the budget. It's viewed as essential for achieving energy sovereignty.
Energy sovereignty, that's a powerful term.
It is, and it's a national level priority that completely outweighs any transient political gains.
That makes perfect sense for a project of this scale, but let me push back a little. Doesn't that kind of insulation from political pushback also risk masking inefficiencies? I mean, if you have guaranteed funding for 50 years, what's the real incentive to innovate quickly or to course correct if you've made a mistake?
That is a legitimate challenge, and it's one that any centralized system faces. However, in the realm of fusion, where the physics constraints are absolute and the capital required is just astronomical, stability and continuity often outweigh the efficiency gains you might get from market competition, at least in the initial pre-commercial research phases.
So the state is basically acting as the ultimate deep-pocketed angel investor.
The state is taking on the risk that the private sector simply cannot or will not absorb. The incentive structure shifts. It's not about quarter-to-quarter financial gain. It's about the long-term strategic goal of industrial dominance.
Okay, let's translate this long-term stability into hard numbers. What kind of financial commitment are we actually talking about that illustrates this difference in strategic priority?
The disparity is startling. I mean, truly. If you look at the total funding mobilized for fusion infrastructure just since the U.S. National Ignition Facility, or NIF, first achieved ignition, China has mobilized at least $6.5 billion.
$6.5 billion. And you're saying that's a conservative estimate?
That's the conservative figure, yes.
Yep.
Some experts who track this suggest the total investment could be as high as $13 billion. Now, compare that with the funding appropriated to the U.S. Department of Energy's Fusion Energy Sciences program over roughly the same time frame. China's mobilized funding is almost 3 times greater.
3 times. A gap of that magnitude suggests two civilizations operating on completely different scales of priority. What does that mean for the pace of Western discovery?
It means the U.S. is essentially trying to run a marathon with these short, frantic bursts of sprinting that are based on annual appropriations. Meanwhile, China is running a continuous state-backed relay race with very deep pockets.
The analogy holds.
And the commitment becomes even clearer when you look at their specific centralized bets. Beijing recently launched the state-owned China Fusion Energy Company, the CFEC. It's backed by a monumental $2.1 billion initial investment.
Wait, hold on. A single brand new state-owned company was seeded with $2.1 billion.
Yes. And to put that into perspective, that single public injection of capital is almost 3 times the size of the entire annual fusion energy budget requested by the U.S. government.
That one number says everything.
Yeah. It demonstrates an unparalleled willingness to absorb the capital-intensive risks of developing the hard infrastructure in that pre-commercial phase. That's something that private markets, even the highly dynamic U.S. venture capital scene, are often very hesitant to do. It's a mechanism of national control. It ensures resources are focused precisely where the state needs them to be for long-term strategic gain.
So the stability is there, the capital is there. Let's look at the physical evidence on the ground. What tangible infrastructure has all this long-term strategic planning actually created?
It creates comprehensive industrial ecosystems. They're following what we can call an infrastructure-first strategy. This is the absolute opposite of fragmented academic lab research. It's a systemic build-out designed from day one to transition fusion from a physics experiment into an industrial reality. The most famous achievement, of course, is the East Tokamak.
The experimental advanced superconducting tokamak, the artificial sun.
Precisely. That's a machine that recently confirmed the 1,066-second sustained plasma run at 120 million degrees Celsius. To really appreciate that, you have to remember that 120 million degrees is about 8 times hotter than the core of our actual sun.
8 times hotter.
Holding that plasma stable for nearly 18 minutes is a monumental engineering feat. And this isn't a one-off. It builds on prior successes, like the 403-second steady-state high confinement mode they achieved way back in 2018. But the real signal, the thing you have to watch, is what is currently rising up from the ground around East on Hefei Science Island.
They're already scaling up, right? This isn't just about breaking records with East anymore. What's the next generation of reactors focused on?
They're moving rapidly toward the critical point of energy gain. First up is the BEST tokamak. That stands for Burning Plasma Experimental Superconducting Tokamak.
BEST.
It's a compact, high-field machine, and it's expected to be operational by 2027, so very soon. And its explicit goal is to reach an energy gain ratio, what we call Q, of between 1 and 5.
Could you just quickly define Q for our listeners?
Of course. Q is the energy gain factor. It's the ratio of the fusion energy you get out to the energy you have to inject into the plasma to heat it up. For fusion to be commercially viable, you need Q to be significantly greater than 1. The machine has to produce more energy than it consumes to start the reaction.
So BEST aiming for a Q of 1 to 5.
Yeah.
That's a huge step. It's a defined industrial objective.
It's no longer just chasing scientific records. It's chasing commercial viability.
And what's being built to support that critical step? Is it just the reactor itself?
No, and this is the crucial part of the ecosystem strategy. BEST is being built immediately adjacent to the massive Kraft campus. That's the comprehensive research facilities for fusion technology. This facility, a $570 million investment, is nearing completion by the end of 2025. And Kraft is absolutely critical because fusion commercialization isn't just about the plasma, it's about the materials that can withstand that extreme environment. Kraft is specifically designed to solve those material science challenges, designing the necessary plasma-facing components and the heat removal infrastructure needed for a real power-generating reactor.
So just be clear, they're simultaneously building the prototype reactor to prove the energy gain and the dedicated industrial material science facility required to actually commercialize it.
Yeah.
It's a highly integrated, holistic approach.
It is, and this integration extends all the way to their long-term vision. They've publicly defined their gigawatt goal with the planned CFETR, the China Fusion Engineering Test Reactor. This is their end game for the 2030s.
And CFETR is aimed at what level of power?
It aims for a full gigawatt of sustained fusion power, so you can see the clear, phased roadmap. Research with East leads to defined energy gain with BEST, which is supported by materials science from Kraft, and finally scales up to utility-level power with CFER.
Now, this entire discussion has focused mainly on magnetic confinement, the tokamak approach.
Yeah.
But what about the other major fusion pathway, inertial confinement? Are they active there too?
That's where their strategic breadth becomes so apparent and where the dual-use nature of fusion really comes to the surface. Satellite imagery and public information have revealed a massive X-shaped structure under construction in Mianyang.
X-shaped structure.
It's modeled after the U.S. National Ignition Facility, NIF, which, as you know, achieved that historic Q greater than 4 breakthrough. However, the Mianyang facility appears to be substantially larger. Some estimates suggest it could be up to 50% bigger than its American counterpart, and it's designed to feature significantly more laser power.
Which implies a massive strategic ambition that goes way beyond just civilian energy.
Precisely. While a facility like that certainly advances inertial fusion energy research, its sheer scale and design mean it can also provide absolutely critical data for the simulation and design of advanced nuclear weapons. This investment in inertial confinement strengthens their strategic deterrence capabilities. It demonstrates that fusion investment isn't just a clean energy play, it's a foundation for future industrial, technological, and military dominance.
So to summarize this first part, what we're looking at is a system that's completely optimized for long-term execution. It's backed by massive, non-flickering capital, and it's resulting in a rapidly building comprehensive infrastructure. An infrastructure designed not just for a one-off scientific breakthrough, but for industrial-scale physical output.
That sets the stage perfectly for our second phase, which is about why this race is accelerating so dramatically right now. The driving force isn't just climate idealism, it's something much harder, much more immediate. It's energy realism, the unavoidable physical necessity of power generation.
I keep coming back to that perspective from the data center architect. He didn't care about carbon quotas or ESG scores. He saw the East breakthrough as the only mathematically possible solution to what he called the AI power wall.
The AI energy imperative has completely changed the strategic calculus. We need to move beyond the moralistic debates about climate change for a moment and acknowledge the root physical necessity of powering this exponentially growing compute infrastructure. AI is not just lines of code, it is a colossal infrastructure demand. And that demand requires persistent, high-density, 247 baseload power.
I see the link you're drawing here. You can't dominate the future of computing or artificial intelligence or data processing without first dominating the energy source that feeds those massive compute clusters.
That convergence forms what I call the Skeal triangle of energy computing sovereignty. Let's just look at the numbers. Data centers are already one of the fastest growing consumers of electricity globally. In 2023, data centers consumed an estimated 460 terawatt hours, or TWH, worldwide.
460?
Now, projections suggest that by 2030, that consumption could surge past 1,000 TWH.
1,000 terawatt hours. That is a staggering physical demand. To put that in perspective for you, that single industry segment would require nearly a quarter of the current annual electricity consumption of the entire United States.
And this exponential growth, it demands not just volume, but stability. AI workloads, particularly the training of these trillion parameter models or running massive inference tasks, they require stable, non-interruptible power. You simply cannot afford to halt a training run because the wind stopped blowing or the sun went down. This demands a massive, stable, high-capacity baseload requirement.
And this is where current renewable sources, even with the absolute best battery storage we have today, they just fall short of providing the necessary scale and consistency.
Exactly. Fusion is the only zero-carbon source currently conceived that is capable of providing that kind of scale and non-interruptible consistency. And this necessity, it fuels a profound divergence in civilizational philosophy. On one side, you have the Western path, which often embraces austerity as virtue, where success is measured by managed decline, and asking citizens to use less. This inherently risks a reduction in capacity and a managed decline.
And the other side?
The strategic calculus in the East is centered on a very different idea. Abundance is power. They are betting heavily on fusion to unlock near-infinite, cheap energy that can supply future compute clusters without any constraint. Fusion is seen as the ultimate anti-entropy weapon against scarcity.
So it shifts the whole civilizational argument. It's not about figuring out how to divide up existing scarcity anymore.
It's about figuring out who gets to unlock physical abundance.
That philosophical difference has to have immediate commercial implications. Are we seeing large U.S. tech companies moving toward nuclear as a baseload necessity for their own data centers?
Oh, they absolutely are. The tech giants, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, they are recognizing that just purchasing renewable energy credits is no longer sufficient for their strategic needs. We are seeing a major shift. They're entering long-term agreements with advanced nuclear developers. They're exploring ownership models. Some are even investing directly in securing dedicated small modular reactors, or SMRs, to power specific data center campuses.
So the market is waking up to this reality.
Nuclear and eventually fusion is rapidly becoming a mandatory strategic pillar for any company that wants to dominate the AI economy.
This brings us back to the market structure, though. The U.S. narrative always emphasizes the superior dynamism of its private sector. How does that private dynamism stack up against China's state-backed scale in this new phase?
Well, the U.S. undeniably leads in total private investment and dynamism. There's no question. Globally, equity investment in private fusion companies has reached about $13.9 billion. A significant majority of that $7.57 billion is invested in U.S. firms.
So more than half of all private fusion money is in the U.S.?
Yes, which account for 29 of the world's 53 active private fusion companies. And this includes incredibly fast-moving startups like Helion, which has a contract to deliver power to Microsoft by as early as 2028. That ability to mobilize private capital and push radical innovation quickly is a genuine Western strength.
But, as we discussed, China's strategic edge is in public capital backing the scale, which stabilizes the infrastructure needed for commercialization.
That's the key distinction. If you look again at China's conservative $6.5 billion investment, The overwhelming majority, around 78% combined, originates from central or provincial government funding. This system, which is characteristic of party-state capitalism, allows the state to direct and coordinate the economy in ways that ensure long-term security across different economic environments.
It de-risks the whole thing.
It allows the state to absorb the tremendous capital risks of building physical infrastructure, which, again, private markets typically avoid until profitability is absolutely guaranteed. The state acts as the ultimate venture capitalist and the ultimate insurance policy for hard tech.
It's risk reduction through centralized strategic force.
Precisely. And what's more, China is not putting all its eggs in one basket. It's pursuing diversified state bets. It's a strategy of taking multiple shots on goal across different fusion technologies.
Can you give us some specific examples of this diversification? How are they spreading their bets?
Sure. Beyond the publicly owned CFEC that we mentioned, we see several other crucial initiatives. First, there's neofusion. This is the commercial arm that's been developed out of the BEST project.
The one aiming for Q greater than 1.
That's the one. And it has significant backing, not just from central authorities, but also from provincial governments and even private sector companies like the electric vehicle maker NIO. This shows a blend of state guidance with market forces.
Yes, interesting. What else?
Then there's Xingwo. This is a major 100-megawatt fission fusion hybrid project. A hybrid reactor uses a fusion core to produce neutrons, which then sustain a fission blanket. It actually makes the reactor easier to build and lowers the required fusion game threshold.
A sort of stepping stone technology.
Exactly, a technologically conservative path. And this project is funded 50-50 by a central government entity and a private company subsidiary, showing co-investment. And finally, they're also backing a portfolio of private firms like ENN Energy Research Institute, which is pursuing multiple approaches, including spherical tokamaks and energy singularity, another compact tokamak company that receives government support alongside its private investment.
So it sounds like, well, the U.S. is largely dependent on one or two private companies hitting a home run. China has state-backed systems in place to ensure that if any fusion pathway works, magnetic, inertial, or hybrid, they are positioned to rapidly commercialize it and deploy it at scale.
That is the assessment. The race is transition. It's not about who achieves the next scientific paper anymore. It's about who achieves industrial sovereign deployment. And China is building the infrastructure and hedging the bets necessary for the latter.
This shift in priority from, say, financial return to physical output, it brings us to what might be the cultural core of this competition. It's not just about money. It's about what a society values. I keep thinking about that anecdote of the young high-precision welder working on the East Tokamak. He spoke about his craft with such pride, describing his role as a master craftsman. In his social context, being an engineer dedicated to a national-level hard-tech project carries this immense social weight and prestige, far higher than, say, a high-frequency trader or a corporate lawyer in the West. This truly embodies what you call an engineering-first culture.
That cultural prioritization is perhaps the most fundamental difference between the two civilizational models right now. An engineering-first culture prizes physical creation, building things, manufacturing, perfecting the hard sciences. In contrast, the Western economic trajectory over the last few decades has resulted in top talent being disproportionately siphoned into industries like finance, law, and consulting. These are professions that are overwhelmingly focused on allocating, optimizing, and frankly, manipulating existing wealth. They are not focused on creating new fiscal power.
So on one side, they are creating fundamentally new sources of physical energy. And on the other, we are becoming hyper-efficient at redistributing or refinancing the existing sources of wealth.
That imbalance is the textbook definition of financialization. The economic historian Greta Krippner defined it as a pattern of accumulation in which profit-making occurs increasingly through financial channels.
Through things like speculation, financial instruments, debt-to-equity ratios.
Rather than through commodity production and trade.
Exactly. When financial profit becomes dominant overproductive profit, the society can experience a kind of civilizational vertigo, a loss of focus on the core physical output that's necessary for continued societal strength.
And this isn't a new phenomenon, right? We have historical examples of great powers peaking when they valued physical output and then declining when they pivoted to financial abstraction. Oh, absolutely. Economic historians have identified this as a recurring pattern. The moment a leading global power sees its financial sector take over the dominant economic, cultural, and political role, it has often signaled the beginning of systemic decline.
Like with Spain.
We saw this with Habsburg Spain in the 16th century. The massive influx of gold from the New World led to rampant financial speculation and a decline in their domestic productive industry. We saw it again with the British Empire in the 19th and early 20th centuries, as the City of London prioritized managing global financial assets over maintaining Britain's own manufacturing base.
The final step in that progression always seems to be a societal focus on inflating the prices of existing assets, like real estate or stocks. Instead of investing in new factories and fundamental innovation, it's prioritizing the balance sheet over the blast furnace.
And that prioritization has direct, measurable consequences on national capacity, especially in these hard tech sectors. This financially abstracted environment, when it's coupled with certain policy choices in the West, often drives deindustrialization as a conscious policy choice.
You mean it's not just happening by accident?
It's compounded by powerful ideologies, particularly certain green philosophies, that embrace anti-nuclear dogmas and actively promote deliberate degrowth. They foster an economy where manufacturing capacity shrinks and resource austerity is championed as a moral virtue.
That sounds like a dangerous self-imposed constraint, especially when you're facing a determined geopolitical competitor that views abundance as power.
It creates critical capacity constraints. We can use a stark military example just to quantify this industrial decline. Look at the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. After more than 2 years of intense fighting, the combined output capacity of the United States and Europe, which represents over 40% of global GDP, failed to match the capacity of Russia, which represents under 3% of global GDP, to produce basic armaments like artillery shells.
That's a profound failure of industrial capacity. It's shocking when you put the numbers side by side like that.
It is a physical manifestation of where the priorities lie. Russia is currently producing some 3 million shells per year. The US and the EU combined produce only about 1.2 million. This immense gap in hard, physical output capacity cannot be explained away by financial metrics. It is a direct consequence of decades of deindustrialization and a cultural shift away from manufacturing and engineering prowess.
And this industrial decline is something that Chinese analysts are observing very closely.
They interpret this, along with Western internal turmoil, rising identity politics, social atomization, low trust in institutions, the collapse of institutional legitimacy as concrete signs of civilizational decay. They call it the Atlantic Twilight.
The Atlantic Twilight.
And this isn't just casual observation for them. They view these elements as factors that will continually scramble Western politics, distract leaders, and accentuate Western decline in the long-term geopolitical struggle.
So from their strategic perspective, the Western emphasis on financial maneuvering and internal cultural disputes is seen not just as a domestic issue, but as a critical national security vulnerability that they actively seek to avoid and potentially to exploit.
Absolutely. They treat unwanted Western cultural influence, particularly extreme individualism and what they see as nihilism, as detailed in internal CCP political theory, as an outright national security threat. Their core belief is that if China were to embrace that level of social atomization and loss of institutional focus, it would forfeit its ability to maintain stability and pursue vital, long-term strategic projects like fusion.
So maintaining an engineering first, unified national focus is a prerequisite.
A prerequisite for achieving what they see as total victory in the realm of ideological and technological conflict.
Okay, we've established that competition is strategic, it's economic, and it's cultural. Let's try to create a concrete geopolitical scorecard to assess the current status. The general consensus seems to be that the U.S. maintains a lead in pure scientific breakthroughs. MILFIF achieved a Q greater than 4, which is incredible, but China is rapidly building the industrial base needed to dominate commercialization.
That's the critical distinction, science versus industrial deployment. On the R&D and IP front, while the U.S. holds those key breakthrough achievements, China is closing the gap rapidly in intellectual property. And this is crucial. They filed more fusion patents than the U.S. in 2023.
More patents. That signals a shift.
It reflects a definite shift from basic research to applied engineering and commercial development. They're focused on how to build it, not just whether it can be done.
And what about the long-term workforce, the people you need for this massive industrialization push?
The talent pipeline figures are perhaps the most alarming indicator of future dominance. Right now, China is producing 10 times more fusion PhD graduates than the United States.
10 times.
Think about what that means in 5 or 10 years. That is the massive workforce, the engineers, the plasma physicists, the material scientists, the technicians. That's necessary for long-term industrial dominance. The people who will design, build, and operate these power plants at scale. Furthermore, if you track publications in the field's premier journal, Nuclear Fusion, China has now surpassed the US in the percentage share of publications over the past decade. The intellectual engine is moving.
That suggests that even if the U.S. manages to achieve the next major scientific milestone, China might be the only country with the human resources and the industrial capacity to take that discovery and scale it globally within 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
But that scale-up requires more than people. It requires materials. This brings us to the supply chain reality. Is this where the U.S. faces its single biggest vulnerability?
It is the Achilles heel of the entire U.S. fusion effort. As fusion transitions from experimental physics to a functioning grid technology, control over specialized critical components and materials becomes a decisive strategic weapon. And China, through decades of state-backed mining and processing investment, is positioned extremely well to control critical links in this chain.
What are the specific materials they dominate that are absolutely essential for commercial fusion deployment?
We're talking about the very backbone of the reactor and the fuel itself. First, high-temperature critical materials. China produces 80% of the world's tungsten.
80%.
And 67% of the world's vanadium. These metals are essential for manufacturing the highly durable plasma-facing components in magnetic fusion reactors. They have to withstand immense heat and neutron bombardment, and the Chinese state has maintained and expanded control over the processing and export of these materials.
Okay, so that's the bottle. What about what goes inside it?
The fuel bottleneck. This is arguably the most critical vulnerability of all. The primary fuel input for deuterium-tritium fusion, which is the most likely first-generation approach, is enriched lithium-6. This material is currently only produced commercially at scale in 2 places, China and Russia.
Let me just repeat that. The U.S. currently has no domestic source for its primary fusion fuel input.
That is correct. After the closure of key U.S. processing facilities years ago, the U.S. government has been left without a dedicated domestic source for lithium-6. This makes the entire future fuel cycle of the American fusion industry dependent on its primary geopolitical rivals.
And restarting that capability isn't simple.
Reestablishing a domestic supply chain for enriched lithium-6 is a multi-billion-dollar, multi-year endeavor that has simply not been adequately prioritized.
And what about for inertial confinement fusion, like that huge Mianyang facility we discussed? Are there similar supply chain risks there, too?
Absolutely. The inertial approach relies heavily on high-power electronics and advanced laser systems. China dominates the raw materials, gallium, indium, and germanium that are needed for manufacturing the high-performance laser diodes crucial for those systems. Furthermore, they hold a general massive industrial lead in the high-power electronics and high-voltage capacitors required for any pulsed fusion approach.
So to put it bluntly, the U.S. may lead in the conceptual science, but China controls the supply chain for the plasma vessel, the high-power electronics, and the fuel line. That makes the entire U.S. industry incredibly exposed to strategic supply chain shocks.
The U.S. government has been slow to recognize the shift from academic physics to industrial hegemony. While the private companies are innovative and fast, they are relying on global supply chains that are overwhelmingly controlled by their primary geopolitical competitor.
Finally, how are other major nations responding to this accelerating two-power race? Are they just aligning with the U.S. private model, or are they establishing their own state-backed paths?
Every major technological power has recognized that this is a race that requires a state-level strategy, even if they operate within democratic frameworks. The UK, for example, has a very focused strategy centered on spherical tokamaks, particularly their STEP program. They're pioneering fusion-specific regulation and have designated it as a high-priority industrial strategy backed by public funds.
And what about the rest of Europe?
Europe and Germany are heavily invested in the large-scale international collaboration IDEA, but also in their own domestic concepts like the Stellarator. Germany's Wendelstein 7X recently achieved a record-setting performance, and Germany just announced a substantial $2.3 billion pledge to support domestic research and pilot plant development.
So they're also putting serious state money on the table.
Yes. Japan and South Korea are focusing on advanced technology development and supplier expertise, with Japan unveiling a 10-year roadmap to commercialize fusion, acknowledging the need for a state-guided structure. And you have Canada, which plays a vital supply chain role as a major tritium supplier, thanks to its CANDU reactors.
So it seems the global consensus is clear. This technology is just too strategically vital to be left entirely to the short-term incentives of private capital or the fluctuations of a 4-year electoral cycle. State capacity is seen as a necessary foundation for hard tech hegemony.
That's right.
So that 1,066-second sustained plasma run, it really wasn't a scientific victory for its own sake. It was a physical signal flare. It announced that the physical center of gravity for human civilization, the ability to harness fundamental power, is demonstrably shifting towards systems that are optimized for long-term execution and physical output.
The core truth is laid bare by that single event. The future will be defined by the creation of energy abundance, and the choice for nations is stark. You either lead the 21st century through massive sustained investment in hard tech hegemony and the generation of that abundance.
Or you don't.
Or you manage a long-term economic and civilizational retreat defined by austerity, bureaucratic oversight, and financial abstraction. The era of simply rearranging the existing resources is definitively ending.
The future will belong to the most competent reactor, not the most eloquent manifesto.